Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stephen Kohler, and on behalf of Audira Labs, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome today's guest, Laila Tarraf, who is an incredibly inspirational leader on so many counts. She's not only an incredibly inspirational leader in the world of corporate leadership, as we'll learn. She's currently the Chief People Officer of Allbirds and formerly held very senior executive positions at Peet's Coffee, Walmart.com, just to name a few. She's also an incredible leader at home, as we'll discuss as a journey as a parent and as a sibling and as a daughter. She also leads in the community. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention her incredibly best-selling book that is now on shelves, so to speak, and on the New York Times best-selling list, called Strong Like Water: How I Found the Courage to Lead with Love in Both Business and Life. Laila, welcome.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm happy to be here.
Laila, I know I just introduced a bit of your background, but for those of you who may not be familiar with Laila, would you like to introduce a little bit about your journey to date from a leadership perspective?
Sure. So interesting how your life just happened so quickly. I think picking up from my undergrad was in computer information systems. I graduated in the 80s, and I always say if I was 10 years younger, I might have stayed in technology. But then I went back to business school. I went to Berkeley, to the Haas School of Business, and I got out of business school in '98, and this was in the beginning of the first internet bubble. So it was just crazy. And I fell into a couple of crazy startups at the time. I don't know if you remember Webvan. That was the first attempt to try to bring groceries to your home, but it wasn't its time. It was a great idea. It wasn't its time. And then I fell into Walmart.com. I was employee number 7. It was the first time that Walmart Inc. tried to really put a big effort around this whole internet thing, which did not seem like it was going away. And it was very hard for them to get engineers and tech talent out in Bentonville, Arkansas. They put it out here in California. We started the first iteration of Walmart.com. Over 7 years, we built it to over $500 million, 700 employees. And that was an incredible ride. And then after that, all roads led to Bentonville for me. And I, as much as I had, enjoyed working with my friends in Arkansas, I didn't want to move from Northern California to Arkansas. So I moved to Peet's Coffee. And that was an interesting challenge because that was, Peet's Coffee had been a private company for 35 years, really filled with coffee experts. And then it went public, and all of a sudden it was moving into these different channels of business. And that was the opportunity there was really to make sure that you didn't lose the essence of what made Peet's special, but then to bring in the broader business capabilities that the company needed to grow. And that was sort of another 7-year run. And then after that, I spent a few years in private equity, really focused on high growth companies. And as you said earlier, the last couple of years, I've been at Allbirds, which has been incredible, very high growth startup, very different time. I'm saying these days that anybody who hasn't led through a global pandemic and broad social unrest, I don't want to talk to you, because the world today makes 2010 feel like it was 1950 Pleasantville. It is so complex, so nuanced. It's like 3D chess, and an incredible, exciting challenge.
Well, beautifully said. And let me just say, what an inspiring journey you've been on. And I guess with that, I'd like to maybe start for our listeners and those watching with really the book that I found so meaningful, that ties so many of your experiences together. In terms of Strong Like Water, Laila, when was the moment you decided that it was the right moment to tell your story?
It's a great question. I didn't grow up having aspirations to be an author, but there was a period in my life, as my first year at Peet's. It's really my first executive role at a public company. And, I had a bit of imposter syndrome, and my daughter was 3 years old. And in the following 4 or 5 years, I experienced 3 big losses in my life: my husband, my father, and then my mother. And those losses really ended up being a catalyst for a lot of personal growth for me, a lot of self-reflection. And I had to shift how I had held myself up until that point. I was I had a very sunny personality. I reframed everything to the positive. Oh, you're just not looking at it the right way. And those are wonderful, wonderful qualities, but there's sort of a shelf life to them.
Mm.
And if you continue to hold yourself in that way, you miss a lot of opportunity for real growth. And I realized that, and that's really when I started to go deep, and I started to listen, and I started to challenge myself to stay with the icky feelings and the messiness of life. And the more I did that, the more insights I had about myself and the world, and I would share it with my friends, being more vulnerable than I'd ever been in my life. And more often than not, my friends would say, oh yeah, I do that too. Oh yeah, no, I know what you mean. And I thought, wait a minute, this is not just me. And I realized, like, sort of the shame and the doubt, and sort of this facade I was putting on, I thought that was just me. Then I realized we all do it on some level. And I realized that the personal was universal. And I thought, if I can capture my insights and my learnings into a book that can light the way for someone else who is on this path of self-discovery, then that, what else is there, right? Where, I love the Ram Dass saying, he says, in the end, we're all just walking each other home.
Mm.
And I think you get to a certain age, and I just want to help others on their path as well, because that's really what it comes down to. So that's when I decided to publish the book, because I saw how rich my conversations were with friends and colleagues and mentees around me, and I thought, well, I'm going to put this out there and see if it can help others.
Well, first of all, thank you on behalf of all of us for sharing in a very vulnerable way the journey you've been on, the loss that you experienced during that journey, and then the growth that came as a result. And I also want to highlight, I appreciate your use of the word listening, because of course here at Audira, we love to really highlight that as an opportunity for all of us as leaders. And to that point, Laila, you mentioned this powerful point early in the book about being right is not the point. Can you tell our listeners and watchers more about what you meant by that?
That was a really big lesson for me. And I'm not sure I got it the first time. It took a few years for that really to sink in. I think there's a certain personality type, overachievers, and we're wired to get the right answer and to do it fast, because it's a race or something. And really it becomes how we add value, how we show our worth and our competence, right? And I've learned that when you're so focused on being right, you're usually not tuned in to what's really happening around you and what the other person is really saying. Because you're kind of waiting for them to stop talking. You're waiting for their lips to stop moving, because you've already sort of thought about what your response should be to show your value because you're right. And I realized that really is more about your ego than really truly understanding what's happening and what's being said. I don't know if you know Marshall Goldsmith. He's sort of, I think
the guru.
The very first coach ever. Exactly. I had the opportunity I was invited back after I graduated from business school. He was doing a workshop, and he did this wonderful workshop. And I'll never forget, he said, oh, look at you, all you freshly minted MBAs, you're just dying to add value. And we are like, yeah, so, and he said, the next time you're compelled to add value, I want you to do two things. He said, first, breathe. And he was always saying that, like, just take a beat, pause for a second. And then he said, ask yourself, will my saying this increase their level of commitment? And if it doesn't, don't say it. That was like lightning struck me on the head, right? I'm like, oh, and I realized how often I said things to show that I was right, I was smart, I was capable, I was competent, I. And it really wasn't about listening not just to the words, but to the nuance, the things that are not said, because that's where the richness is in the conversation. So that, that being right is something I think we all have to break at some point in our careers, because it doesn't serve us. It serves us for the first half to get us to a certain point, and at some point it starts to hold us back.
Beautifully said. And I love where you pointed in terms of this concept, this pattern many of us are guilty of listening with the intent to respond, right? We're just cueing. And I love your story from Marshall Goldsmith. And it's so true, right? Of how we try to make it about us, not about the other person. And that leads me to another real powerful point you make in the book, Laila, where you talk about in terms of listening, where you stand depends on where you sit. Can you tell us a little bit more about that learning?
I got that one from the CEO at Pete's, Pat O'Day. He used to have all these little sayings, and at first I thought they were quirky and old school, and now I'm saying them myself. And he used to say, where you stand depends on where you sit, and quite literally it means where you stand on a topic is where you sit in the organization or in your life. So everything is relative, and your point of view is highly dependent on your environment and your circumstances. And so I try to remember that your reality and the other person's reality has so much to do with your perspective in that moment, right? When I was working in private equity, I was seen as, they used to say, oh, you're so kind, you're so warm, you're so compassionate. I'm like, I am. And now at Allbirds, I think people would say I'm direct and firm. I'm the same person. I really, I think I show up similarly. So, but again, the environment in private equity, a lot more sharp elbowed, a lot more masculine. Hate to say, Allbirds is sort of softer, nicer, more collaborative environment. And so, how I am seen, how I show up, where you stand depends on where you sit. Like, depending on whether you think I'm kind and warm and compassionate, or I'm direct and firm. It depends on your perspective and where you sit.
It's beautiful, and it's so powerful, right? That that everything is contextual, and that leads me to another powerful theme throughout that I feel is so groundbreaking. At least it was for me, Laila, which is this theme of finding strength and softness, which in so many contexts, as we know, is not necessarily celebrated. Talk to us a little bit about your learning around strength and softness.
I think this is probably the most relative topic within leadership today, given the world that we live in, right? I don't even know if it's post-pandemic, mid-pandemic. I don't know when this thing will end. It's the new way we're working now. There isn't that big bright light between work and home anymore. And our employees are people and humans that we are relating with. We have to relate with them in a much more connected and personal way. So, 10 years ago, I think we didn't talk a lot about the softer qualities, the soft skills of compassion and empathy and vulnerability. Thank you, Brene Brown. But I would say that what I have learned through my personal journey, but also from having worked for the last 25 years, is that there is more strength in allowing myself to be vulnerable than at any time that I've been more aggressive and demanding. There is, in fact, my book called Strong Like Water is based on a quote by Lao Tzu, who was the father of Taoism. He wrote the Tao Te Ching, and verse 78 is called Be Like Water. And in it, he talks about that whatever is soft and yielding is more powerful than what is hard and rigid. And so I think this is the strength and softness. And it's not easy, and I don't know if this is just a Western thing, but I think there's this misnomer that if I am kind and empathetic and compassionate and yielding and again, practicing active listening rather than just jumping in there, that I'm not being strong. But really quite the opposite is true. So really this balance of head and heart and finding strength and softness, I think is very, very prevalent and very needed in how we need to show up today.
It's beautiful and so true, right? That what the pandemic, I think, has opened for a lot of organizations is that opportunity to shift. You know, I'd love to get your perspective, Laila. One of the themes that I hear from a lot of organizations, particularly right now, is they're recognizing the need to bring empathy and compassion and vulnerability into their culture. They're struggling with how to balance that with accountability. What's your take on balancing those two?
We are going through the same struggle, absolutely. I think, again, there is, I think, a misnomer that to have hard conversations with people, to give feedback, means you need to flip into this other part of yourself to kind of be, you know, no nonsense and direct and disconnect from your humanity to be able to give the tough message. And I actually don't think that's true. I think being able to have the hard conversation, choosing courage over comfort, as I'm saying a lot these days, it is really about how we, each of us, learn how to maintain connection while being able to give feedback. And I think it goes back to that. It goes back to that yin and yang I was just talking about. I think you need to learn how to engage in healthy conflicts, and that's this middle ground, right? Some people in organization, their natural inclination is to lean into it hard, and they become maybe a little more aggressive or even destructive. Others, the inclination is to pull back and be maybe a little soft, and then that ends up being an avoidant culture. And it's really finding that balance between, oh, I don't want to tell you, but then it becomes passive aggressive in other ways, or I'm just going to come in and you know, and then it feels icky. It's finding that middle ground. It's, hey, I'd like to share an observation with you. I'd like to have a conversation. Can I ask you a question? There are ways that you can get into these conversations. And use them as a way to build connection, build trust, so that it's easier to have. You know, I have done that with a few members at Allbirds. We haven't done it as a whole culture. That's the journey we're on. It'll take years to do that. But what I'm proud of is that we have done, some of the executive leadership team members, the way we talk to each other now and the way we model it to the team is we actively debate and we do it respectfully, right? And we show others, like, you know what, our relationship is intact and it's okay. We can go there. And so I think that's the challenge for us, is you have to lean into what needs to be said in order to drive results and hold people accountable. And at the same time, you can still do it with empathy and compassion.
I love that. And thank you for pointing to this idea that it can be that it does not have to be an either or choice, right? And I love your point also about courage over comfort, because we tend to, first of all, we tend to see it as an either or and go to those extremes you mentioned. And we tend to avoid. So the fact that with you, what you've outlined, we can do both and then model it to others is so powerful. I would love to pick up on this idea of kind of modeling. And if I may, you know, one of the incredible themes throughout your book, Laila, if I may say, from my perspective, is the stories you tell about your daughter. I'd love for you to share maybe one lesson out of many, but maybe one lesson you've learned from your daughter along the way that you'd like to share with our listeners today.
Oh, such a good question. You know, one way that she taught me so much when she was just young, she was so in touch with her emotions. When she was unhappy, when she was sad, she would cry. And I would look at her like this creature. It's just, she was so in touch with what was coming up for her. And I had spent my whole life blocking and tucking things away and deflecting and denying. And it took a long time for me to allow myself to really reconnect with how I was feeling and to give myself permission to emote. I wouldn't allow myself to be sad. I wouldn't allow myself to be mad. I just had to be happy all the time. That was how I carried myself. And that's how I was rewarded. And I realized very early on for Nadia that I had to make space for her to what was coming up. And by watching her do that, I was like, oh gosh, you know what? I think this is how we all come out. We all come out these beautiful creatures who are these feeling beings. And then we tell ourselves a story, right? Like, oh, I need to, whatever the narrative is that we develop in our lives. For me, it was, oh, I need to be a good girl and I need to only show this perfect side of me. And I need to show that I'm not a burden to my family. And so I'm not going to act like I have any needs. I think a lot of women have that. It's taken me years and years to say I have needs, which now sounds ridiculous. Of course, I'm a human. But for a long time, no, I'm good, I'm fine. I still now, when people offer me help, I have to fight my default of no, I'm good. Well, wait, are you good? Hold on. And so just this raw ability to express your needs and how you feel is something that she really has taught me, and that it's not seen as a negative or something or overly needy. That's a big learning I've learned from her.
Oh, it's so beautiful. And you're so right that many of us as children come out just as we're intended. And yet we adopt these patterns or narratives, as you say, or stories about what we need to be that's somehow different from that. And it takes years for us to maybe identify those patterns in ways they don't serve us. And what a beautiful reflection. Building on that, in the book, you also talk about one of the many areas of focus at Pete's and the impact you've had at Pete's and many of your organizations is this idea of bringing your whole self to work. Would you mind telling us a little bit about your learning on that front, how we might be able to build on that?
Yeah, I think we've been saying this term for a while now, for over 10 years, right? And I think in the beginning, when we restated Pete's values back in 2007, 2008, we did it under this banner of bring your whole self to work. And what we meant at that time was, hey, we want to see all of you. As Pete's had this really quirky employee base, and a lot of them were artists and musicians. And we wanted to create an environment that accepted all of them. We didn't want them to put their true selves on the shelf and come in and kind of be this corporate guy, because that just wasn't who we were. And now I feel like even that definition has expanded and grown. Because today we call it creating an inclusive work environment, right? And we're so focused on belonging, and I think it's just kind of a higher bar. And I know everyone thinks they want an inclusive environment and to feel like they belong. It's harder to do when alongside diversity. So if we bought into diversity and we're bringing in people different from us, and we're still striving to be inclusive and to all belong to a tribe, and yet we are all different, that really requires us to embrace all of people. And what I love about bring your whole self to work, you really need to see the person as a human, as a person beyond their value to the organization as an employee, because the one thing that connects us all is the human condition. And to me, that is, how do we connect to our common humanity, and create the conditions and the space for all of us to feel comfortable being who we truly are, and not being rejected for those parts of us that maybe we don't like either.
It's so inspirational, Laila. First of all, the way that you've been able to apply bring your whole self to work. And then I really love how you're talking about elevating that to the next level with inclusivity, and this very real tension that may exist between, okay, we get the idea of diversity, bringing in, a diverse set of knowledge, skill, background, experience. And how do we build on that and truly make it inclusive, right? And doing those things in parallel is not always easy. So I appreciate you pointing that out.
Yeah, I mean, it's human nature to go with the thing that feels and looks like you, right? Oh, you act like me, you know me, we live in the same area. It's much easier to do. And now I think we're really challenging ourselves to recognize our unconscious biases and to be more tolerant and to reach across the aisle. I think the greatest gift in the last 2 years has been that there is no playbook for what we're going through. Like, and so you just need to throw it up in the air and say, okay, tell me, how do you feel? What's going on? And just be open.
I love that. And really, as you said, checking in with somebody on a true human level, because that's the ultimate common denominator, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
So I would love to just touch a moment on the role that you're in today. Obviously, you have an incredibly exciting role leading Allbirds as Chief People Officer. What's your vision and the kind of impact you'd like to help create and enable while you're there?
My vision is to help Allbirds move from a high growth startup to really a global sustainable lifestyle brand. And similarly to Pete's, there is a beautiful core to Allbirds that as we grow, we don't want to lose. And if you're lucky enough to be a successful business that starts growing through that high growth phase and have to focus on how do we scale the business, you have to be so intentional with the decisions you make that it doesn't compromise the core of the culture that really is why people came in the first place. And so for us, we are really, really focused on making a positive impact on climate change by creating products that have a lower carbon footprint. That is a beautiful, lofty mission. The way we do that is by becoming a commercial, ongoing entity. And sometimes those two things, there's tension between them. And how we navigate between those two is going to either allow us to be very successful in both our mission and our commercial ambitions or not. And so from a culture perspective, I think, and from a people perspective, our big challenge is how do we support a culture of open feedback? How do we ensure that we support a growth mindset, that we continue to have greater and greater psychological safety, that we're consistent in how we treat our people, that we're able to have the hard conversation compassionately? Those are all the things that we're focused on and will continue to be focused on.
I love that. And let me just echo some of the things that I heard that really, really were powerful for me. First, this idea of, as an organization, how do we hold on as we grow from a startup to a scalable organization? How do we hold on to those things that make us great while also making a lot of the changes that will be necessary to take us to the next level? And then with that, the balance of some of these other things you mentioned, the commercial needs of the organization, the people needs of the organization, all the way down to how to have both compassion and courageous conversations. A lot to hold, and yet that's where the power lies, is in balancing all of those.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, that's beautiful. On behalf of our viewers and listeners, thank you so much. It's been truly a delight to jam with you today. Your journey has been inspirational. And we, with that, wish you all of the best of luck in your journey. And thank you again.
Thank you so much. It's been great to be here.